Genesis chapter 18, starting at the first verse. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered, "do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get 3 seahs of fine flour and knead it to bake some bread." Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked. "There in the tent," he said. Then the Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I am worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I did not laugh." But he said, "Yes, you did laugh."
Well, good morning again. It really is a wonderful privilege to be with you and to share a couple of sessions with you on the wonder of Jesus's teaching. And one of my aims today, a really big aim, is just we go away with a sense of wow at the awesomeness of Jesus Christ, our Lord, who is wondrous in many ways, and we're going to look today at his teaching. One of the things I hope to persuade you is that Jesus is, by any objective measure, the best teacher ever to have walked this planet, the best teacher for us in our lives. You can take a sort of 12-minute section of text like Matthew 5 through to 7, often called the Sermon on the Mount. There are more memes in that text, things that have gone viral, which have become part of our culture, than you would find in any 12-minute speech from anyone. You could think of famous speakers like Winston Churchill and, something about "we'll fight them on the beaches," but that's not useful in most everyday contexts. And he said lots of things that weren't memorable. But Jesus, in that one talk, has things like, "Judge not that you be not judged. Whatever measure you use on others is going to be used back on you." Or, "Do unto others what you'd have them do to you." Incredibly powerful and useful things. Elon Musk was tweeting the other day, as he often tends to, but he was tweeting about the amazing power of the idea of turn the other cheek. Well, who came up with that? It's all there in this amazing teaching of Jesus. And one of the things with Jesus is that he also has integrity. Now, let's just start from the bottom here. There are a lot of people who are brilliant speakers but don't have integrity. All the time one hears about Christian leaders who fall. It's very sad, not going to dwell on any individual examples. Now, if you're new to church, don't be surprised at that. But the key thing in church is not to look at the leaders, it's to look to Jesus. Because leaders will let you down, but Jesus doesn't. But then if you go second up, you'll find that a lot of leaders can be people who can speak well, and they do live according to those teachings. They don't deny them, but also they haven't really suffered a lot. They don't seem to exemplify the teaching. They could give a talk on suffering, but you wouldn't think they'd been through the hard thing that you've been through. But then if we go one up, you can find there are really highly committed teachers and people who really have been it, and you can say their teaching matches with their life. What we see with Jesus is just something far, far above that, who had the glory of heaven and who came down to earth and suffered more than anyone else. You cannot have more teacher integrity than Jesus Christ. So he's the best teacher in terms of the one who most models everything that he teaches. When he talks about giving up your wealth, he's given up his wealth. All those sorts of things, everything, he's just got integrity. But you can also have different levels of knowledge that a teacher can have of an audience. You know, I don't know many of you at all, but you could have someone who would know your needs a lot more carefully, and they would be able to speak and minister to that. But think about Christ, Jesus, who knows all of our weaknesses, all of our strengths, our human condition. Again, just so much a better teacher. Now, I want us to do a bit of analysis of the way that he teaches, and we're going to end up looking at Jesus' shortest parable. And then in the next session, we're going to look at Jesus' longest parable. But first, let's look at how we can analyze Jesus' teaching. Jesus often begins his teaching with a call to hear, or he ends his teaching with a call to hear. It's actually his most repeated saying. He tells people to hear, listen. Now, that's a really important thing because we're often distracted, aren't we? We're looking at our phones and what's going on, and there's so much in the background. And Jesus says, no, in order to learn, we need to concentrate 100%. But I'm not just talking about concentrate 100% in a sort of physical, mental, academic sense. It's heeding in a spiritual sense. We actually need to pay attention to what God is saying to us. Come with a heart prepared to listen and to hear. It was one of the things that was said in the daily prayers of an Orthodox Jewish man. They would repeat Deuteronomy 6 verse 4, where God says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Where we need to tune our hearts to hear. It's a big theme in all four Gospels. Every single one of them will have things about hearing. Here we have in Matthew, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. In Mark, hear me all of you and understand. There's nothing outside a person that going into him can defile him. Or blessed are those who hear the word of God and keep it, in Luke. Or my sheep hear my voice. Again and again, it's so important to hear. And so one of the things we need to pray, and just pray quietly now, is that we would hear God speaking to us. Now, I want to do a bit of sort of slightly academic stuff here, show you a bit of Greek. This is Mark chapter 4, verse 3. Jesus begins the parable of the sower, the parable of the soils, and he begins with these two words, literally, okay? One is listen, and the other is behold, okay? They won't necessarily come out in every English translation because we don't use the word behold so much nowadays, do we? But I want you to notice how he uses those two words. So one related to ears, one related to eyes. And I need to teach you those words, so we're going to look at those. That's a Greek word to listen is akouete, like our word acoustics, okay? And the word to hear is idu, to see is idu, which is like the ID of video. It really is, it's the same word, okay? Now, what I want you to do is have a look at some Greek manuscripts, of course, because it's going to be a bit different from church, okay? You don't normally do this in church. This is the earliest complete manuscript of the New Testament. It's in just next to King's Cross Station in the British Library. And I want you to notice how the manuscripts really highlight this idea. Can you see the top arrow? It's next to akouete. It says, listen up, and then there's a dramatic pause. Then the next paragraph, which like they used to outdent rather than indent, begins, behold, idu. Because Jesus is saying this, listen up guys, now get your hearts ready. Now let the mind's imagination visualize a sower going out to sow. Or, this is another one, this is the second earliest manuscript in the UK, also in the same place. Here it is. See at the end of a column, that word to listen. And you have to go to the top of the next column to get the behold. We wouldn't think of dividing up like that, but in fact it happens all the time. I come from Cambridge, so here's a Cambridge manuscript, our earliest one. Listen at the end of one line, behold at the beginning of another. Or you could go into another language. The Lindisfarne Gospels, really famous, treasure of Britain. And they have that word, they look like just circles, but it's the word audite, listen, and then eke, behold. And it's also got the Anglo-Saxon, the line in between. That is the earliest form of the Bible for this passage in anything close to our language, Anglo-Saxon. Okay, so why would I emphasize that? Because it's so important, and people saw this a long time ago, to emphasize, listen up. The other thing with Jesus is that Jesus doesn't just talk theory. In fact, he never talks theory. Someone comes to him with a theoretical question. This is the theoretical question someone comes to him in Luke. He went on his way through towns and villages, teaching and journeying towards Jerusalem, and someone said to him, Lord, will those who are saved be few? Okay, it's a wonderful sort of essay question, theological question. Let's just work out what proportion of people are going to be saved. Is it going to be few or is it going to be many? And Jesus, which side are you going to go on? Are you going to go on the, no, not many, just a few? Or is it, no, many? What's he going to do? Look at his reply. He said to them, strive to enter through the narrow door, for many, I tell you, will seek to enter and will not be able. Do you notice he's not answered the question in the question's terms? He said many will strive and not be able to enter, but the focus is on practically make sure you enter. So someone says, are few going to be saved? He says, make sure you are saved. You see the difference in the way that he's talking. He never talks unapplied theology. He also, because he's such a great teacher, he knows how to make sure that we do the work, the people he talks to. Now, the thing about asking a question, it actually makes someone work more than just giving them the answer. Now, I know other teachers use questions. There's this guy called Socrates, and like people get famous for that. But I want you to notice how Jesus uses questions. I mean, it's amazing how he does this. Here we are in Mark's Gospel, and he's got 8 questions in a row for the poor bamboozled disciples. But, you know, they realize they've got to ask themselves some deep questions. Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? And so on. By the way, you don't need... all of these slides are with the organisers, and I'm very happy for them to give anyone who wants it that without causing any extra admin, if that can be done. That may not be possible. But Jesus is asked lots of questions in Matthew. He asks 90 questions. He also answers questions with questions. People come to him with a question like this. Matthew chapter 9. The disciples of John came to him saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples don't fast? Jesus said to them, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? And time again, you're going to see, as in red, people ask him a question, he asked them a question back. 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 Yeah, you can't take this all in, can you? Okay. So how can we summarize it? That's in Matthew's Gospel. There are some patterns in these. There were patterns. 3 times he asked them, in response to a question, have you never read? Now, I'm not saying you should use this as a question when someone asks you a Bible question. I don't think it's a really good thing. Like, it just comes across wrong. But Jesus is talking usually to people who are supposed to know the Bible. He's talking to Pharisees, he's talking to scribes, people whose job it is to know the Bible. And of course the answer is, of course they've read it. Yeah, but have they actually read it? You know, it's like you can hear without hearing, and you can read without reading. And so Jesus is asking them to apply themselves spiritually to reading. Haven't you come across this? And he's also pointing people to God's word. And that is something we need to take to heart. As we're trying to convey God's truth to people, to point people to God's word is a key thing to do. The other thing, again, he does, and I'm not suggesting we should do this, is this why do you question. Why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? Why do you ask me about what's good? Why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Why do you trouble the woman? Again and again, why do you? That's a powerful thing, because he's asking people to reflect on their own motives. One of the things we find is that so often we are hypocritical. We use a different standard on someone else than what we use on ourselves. We find this all the time in politics. You can have one party will call out a particular error in the other party until that other party does it themselves, and you know, they do it themselves, and then they're all quiet. And these sort of inconsistencies. And a why do you question begins with what someone's actually doing. It shows people's beliefs, what they're committed to already. And we've got to ask, why do I questions? Why do I do this particular thing? That's the question that Jesus would often ask of us. Now, another feature of Jesus' teaching is this. Jesus repeated himself. Have you noticed how often he repeated himself? We're actually going to spend a bit more time on these. Jesus, in every one of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, repeats himself within that Gospel. So each one of the Gospel writers is showing us that Jesus is someone who repeated himself. By the way, that means it's great. It's okay, if you're a teacher, to teach the same thing again and again. Why? Well, at one level, because we just frail and we forget things, and that's just part of it. We don't remember everything. But we also are frail spiritually. Spiritually, we forget things. And when you look at the way God deals with us, God is our teacher. God teaches us the same lesson again and again in our lives, and we forget it again and again in our lives. That's the way it is. Like every day. Haven't I learned that spiritual lesson before? Oh yeah, that was last week and the week before and the week before. But God's so patient in teaching us again and again the same lesson. And Jesus is like this. And see how he, when he's asked, teaches on divorce twice in Matthew, basically the same words, Matthew 5 and Matthew 19. Or if he says, if your eye offends you, pluck it out and cast it away from you. That's again in Matthew 5 and Matthew 18. If your hand offend you, chop it off. That's in Matthew 5 and 18. Talking about good trees and bearing good fruit, bad trees bearing bad fruit. That's twice. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, twice. You'll be hated for my name's sake, twice. He talks about going to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Again and again, Jesus repeats things. There again, look, more of Matthew's gospel. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, he says 6 times. Many, many times he repeats. Or he will say, the one who has ears to hear, let him hear. Or he predicts his passion. And the same thing happens in Mark. Again and again, he repeats himself. Whoever wants to be first needs to be last. Now, that's a really interesting thing, because one of the things you may sometimes worry about is, why is it saying this in this gospel and this similar thing in that gospel? Like, why does it say, blessed are the poor in spirit in one gospel and blessed are the poor in the other gospel? You think, well, which did he really say? Maybe he said both, because actually Jesus repeats himself, like itinerant preachers do. And you can sometimes see within one gospel, John's gospel, he'll say, I am the vine and I am the true vine. He said both. So you don't need to play one gospel off against each other. And that's what often happens, is people say, oh, is it this or that? The point is, Jesus went around teaching again and again, and people heard his teaching. And by the way, if you're one of his disciples, which means you're one of his students, you go round hearing him again and again. My brother used to work for a stand-up comedian, and by the end of, being his PA for long enough, he thought, I could do the whole gig. I mean, maybe not with a quite perfect timing, but he knew what phrase was coming next. Now, I'm not saying Jesus is like that, but I am saying that Jesus taught again and again as a good teacher, knowing that people forget. There were revision sessions built in. So that explains also why you can get so much of what he taught reliably in the Gospels. It's because he taught it so well to many people, and it all got written down. Or look at this. how again and again he will say some of the same things to people. Sometimes in conversation, he'll say the same thing to one person as he says to another person. Sometimes it will be in his teaching. He'll say the same thing again and again. And it's there in John. Truly, truly, I say to you, he said 25 times, I'm going to the Father. He says again and again and again. Because Jesus knows our frailty. Jesus knows he has to repeat himself. What's more, though, Jesus doesn't just know our frailty, he also produces memory aids. And I want to show you a little bit about this. Again, because I'm not sure you'll necessarily be able to get this every week, so hopefully you don't mind. It's another excuse to use a bit of Greek. So I think Jesus taught in more than one language because he would reach out to people where they were. If he's talking to a little girl, he'll say Talitha Kum, that's her language. If he's talking to a guy who's deaf and dumb, he'll say Ephatha, that was his language. But there's a time in Matthew chapter 4 where there's a whole group of people that are coming together for what's sometimes called the Sermon on the Mount. We could call it the Lesson on the Mount. And they're coming from all around the place. Galilee, the Decapolis, which are like the 10 Greek cities east of the Sea of Galilee, where they don't really speak Aramaic. And they're from Jerusalem, they're from Judea, they're from beyond the Jordan. Well, if you get a whole mix of people together, they tend to go to whichever language has more power. And in that setting, it would have been going to Greek. And what's an interesting thing is, I don't know whether you know this, but when Jesus begins the Beatitudes, I'll put them all up in Greek there, but you've got the English in front of you, Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through to 10, Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." The word poor begins with the letter pi. That's 3.14, you know, that pi. Right? And so does the word spirit. And then the next one is, blessed are those who mourn, but they'll be comforted. And they both begin with the letter pi. And the next one is, blessed are the meek, with the letter pi. And the next one is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And the word hunger begins with letter pi. That's all in green. But it's not just that. They hunger and thirst for righteousness. And that's in yellow. There in verse 6, the hunger and thirst for righteousness, the word thirst begins with a D, I, delta, iota, and so does the word righteousness. Or you look at verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart. Well, the word pure begins with a K, a kappa, alpha, and so does the word heart. Think of the word cathartic, to purify. My wife is called Catherine. Her name begins K-A, pure, you see, K-A. So does cardiology. That's like CA, same thing, pure in heart. That's where the word comes from. So he's got these memory aids built into things. When he says to them at the end of the sermon, beware, beginning PRO, of false prophets, beginning PRO, they'll come to you in the clothing of sheep, PRO. Again and again, you can find this in his teaching. So Jesus is someone who teaches so that we can remember. He teaches perfectly. I want us now to look at Jesus' shortest parable. That was all sort of by way of preamble, right? Just to show you some of the wonder of how you can dig in sort of on the technical side with Jesus' teaching. Jesus' shortest parable is really very short. It's there in Matthew and it's there in Luke. It goes like this. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures, or the word for measure is seahs, of flour, till all was leavened. Bang! That's the end. There's not much there, is there? I mean, what's the point of that? Bit underwhelming, isn't it? I mean, how many of you have this as your favourite parable? It's one of my favourites, but I mean, you know, aren't you completely underwhelmed by this parable? Or as it is in Luke, it is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures, that is, seahs of flour. Well, one thing I do, because I look at this sort of from an academic side and also from a side of the authenticity of the Bible, is we can actually geolocate this saying because of the particular word for measure that it used. You see, measures vary from place to place. Over in France and continental Europe, people are using kilometers, and we generally here are using miles. Now, over in America, they use miles, but they use Fahrenheit, and here we're generally using Celsius. So if you had someone talking in miles and Celsius, You might sort of geolocate this, and you limit the number of countries that that's actually going to work for. Now, dry measures varied from place to place. That's why when Josephus, the Jewish historian, had to explain to his audience what a seah was worth, because outside of the land of the Jews, no one would know what it was. And so you can geolocate Jesus is saying. It really makes sense that Jesus said it. You've got lots of reasons to think Jesus said it, and we're going to see some more later. One is, it's a parable. And parables basically are something that come from this particular area. From Palestine, rabbis outside there don't tend to use parables. And we can also say that Jesus is particularly associated with parables. He got more parables than anyone else said. There were rabbis who said parables. Jesus said a whole load more. But also you can say that dry measure also helps us locate where this saying comes from. But we can do a little bit more, because it's 3 seahs. And if we do a sort of Bible search, we can find out there's only one time that we're going to get 3 seahs in the Bible, and they're actually 3 seahs of flour, just like in this passage. There are other times that you get seahs, but they're not 3. That's all of the references that you get in the Old Testament. They're up on the screen. And one of them was the one we had read earlier. That amazing, important passage of Genesis chapter 18 that we all know is incredibly, incredibly important. We're going to keep thinking about that through the day, because it's when 3 guests come to Abraham. And he says, let me just do a little meal for you. And then he goes and kills a calf, which would probably have 400 portions of meat for the 3 guests. And you can see the speed that everything's rushing around at. He is doing an amazing job on the hospitality. And of course, God's no man's debtor. That's why Abraham is put in charge of the heavenly feast, isn't it? And you see him in the New Testament where he's presiding over the feast, because he does the Bible's first hospitality. Yes, I know that there was a sort of Deliveroo service by Melchizedek, but I'm actually meaning welcoming into your house. And that's where Abraham was an amazing host. He ran. He made other people run. He rushed around, and he said, quick, to Sarah. And he doesn't even say a verb. He just, quick, 3 seahs of flour. And what we can see is Jesus picks up that number. As often he does in his parables, he picks up numbers from the Old Testament. And what you can see is that is how the kingdom of heaven is like. Because the kingdom is like a woman taking leaven, yeast, and putting it into 3 measures of flour until it all grows. I think that really, there's only one woman we know who does that, and it's the woman Sarah. And that was the most successful baking ever in the Bible. Because from that beginning, so much has come. God said to Abraham and Sarah, when they're too old to have children, you're going to have one son. They have a son, and from him comes all of the Jews. From him comes David. From him comes Christ, from whom all our salvation comes. And we're Abraham's offspring. You can't have more successful baking than that. Sarah's baking was amazing, easy to underestimate. It didn't seem very big at the time. In fact, she thought it was a bit of a joke when she was told she was going to have a son. And no, that's really ridiculous, because I'm aged 90 and that sort of stuff doesn't happen. That's just laughable. And she laughs in her head, did you notice? And God hears her laughing in her head, and so she has to deny. No, I wasn't actually laughing. Oh, but you were. And so's God. I mean, there's a bigger joke here, isn't there? The joke's on Sarah. She laughed at God's plans, but, look at what God's plans were. What an amazing thing comes from that God visited this old couple that would be completely weak, couldn't do anything, and from that, he's going to bless all of the families on earth. How can you get more big and more exciting than that? And that's all in Jesus' little story. So it's a little story. It doesn't look like it's saying much, but actually, as you hear and you heed and you listen, you suddenly realize there's so much more. What's God doing in your life? It may seem incredibly small. Your act of faithfulness, you think, what's that doing? Is that going to help anyone? You do not know how much good God can bring through one act of faithfulness. And it's not just that the kingdom of heaven is like that for Sarah. The kingdom of heaven is like that generally. That's the description that Jesus uses for how the kingdom of heaven works. Invest in the kingdom of heaven and you have no idea how much can come. It's explicitly said throughout the Bible that God always exceeds expectations. That's the whole idea in Ephesians chapter 3. There's this amazing prayer towards the end, chapter 3, verse 14 through to 21, where it ends with God who's able to do abundantly more than we ask or imagine. And the context there in Ephesians is how God has worked to bring Jews and Gentiles together into one body. Now, if you'd had a word with an Old Testament major figure like Moses or Aaron and said, you know, it's God's plan all along to make the Jews and all the other nations part of one body, they would say, no, that can't be God's plan because we're told to spend all of our time separating from the other lot. But God's plan was bigger. You look at the disciples the day after Christ died, and they're disappointed because they were big visionaries. They really were. The disciples were big visionaries. They thought Jesus was so powerful, he could beat the Romans. Now, if you believe that, you are a big visionary. You really are. But they had underestimated what Jesus was doing. He was defeating something even bigger. He was defeating sin. And again, God over-delivers. And then it will say in 1 Corinthians how eye hasn't seen and ear hasn't heard the thing that's God's plan for those who love him. God, over and over again, is delivering more than we ask or imagine. So Jesus, in this tiny little story, says the kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. And that is a story that is really worth thinking again and again about. So what can we say about Jesus? He's the greatest teacher ever. He's perfect in his person. He never does anything wrong. He's a perfect example. He engages our hearts. He helps make us do the work with questions. He knows our weaknesses. He helps our memories. And he packs an awful lot in. And we're going to see in the next session how he packs a lot into his longest story from Luke chapter 15. But let's just pray now. Lord, thank you that you're the best teacher. And we ask that today we will sit and learn from you. That you will speak to our hearts. That we'll have hearts to hear and to listen what you have to say to us. Please help us. We are weak. We know that you are strong. Thank you for Christ who died for our sins. And may we grow in him today and grow more to love and worship you. Amen.